Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 10 in Australian social policy. This week, we are focusing on unemployment policy. So I'll start by speaking briefly about policy and program evaluation because this will be really useful to our next assessment, assessment 3. And then I'll move on to speak to unemployment policy more broadly. So we shall start by a quick recap of some of the notions we had already been considering in week 1, 2, 3, and even 4. And then these will be really useful to how we do our next assessment. And that will lead us to also outline the key concepts and processes involved in program evaluation, which is the main task for our next assessment. So we might have spoken about the policy cycle process in some of the weeks. So, and these stages you have here, we might have mentioned them in one way or another. And in textbooks, whether about policy, social policy, program evaluation, or even project management, you might find these stages being repeated. Just really to let you know how policy making and policy practice involves a cyclical process of different stages, moving from one stage to another. And of course, I have to acknowledge that these stages might not always be following a linear pathway. You might be at one of these stages and then you need to go back to another. So it's kind of this, what we called in week 1, trial and error process. So we mentioned stages like identifying the issues and setting the agenda. In many cases, that's where you start when you are involved in policy making and even in project management or project design, project planning. Then you start crafting policy proposals. And of course, getting those onto the agenda might be another sub step which might be involved here. And then official approval and validation of the policy. And that in itself might again involve a few steps. And then policy implementation is actually a big one. Really have to insist on this because what we have observed in the past has been policies which had been in place just on papers, but not really implemented. The implementation is one of the most crucial steps in policy practice because that's where you try to translate the policy which has been adopted into tangible action, into operational actions to address the issues which had been identified. So really important for you to start considering which policies might be out there, but which have never been translated into actions. But also the question of how do we translate policy into action is a crucial one because a policy, as we said in week 1, is just, a broad statement on, things which should happen. But now to translate that kind of visionary, ideal into something operational, we move from the policy to what is known as program. So program actually is, the operational implementation of the policy we have been speaking about. But also even programs might still sound broad or big enough. And that's where you move from program to projects. So in a sense, under a certain policy, you might have different programs. And under those programs, actually, you might have sub-programs called projects. And these projects become again more practical, more operational, and the idea behind project is just that they are time-bound. That's where you have a clearer picture of where the resources will be going, where which specific actions you'll be taking, which tasks will be performed to achieve, the outcomes you desire. And once you have done this implementation work here, the next stage is around evaluation of the outcome. You now want to understand whether the issues which have been identified, the proposals you have been putting forward, the validation, the objectives you have been setting, have they been met? And did you achieve the outcome which is desired? Now, this is very interesting because at this stage, then you can decide whether to move forward with the same kind of work, and that might require maybe some sort of redesign, or to terminate the intervention. So it's kind of a cyclical intervention. If you find that maybe the issues have been addressed, maybe it was just, a specific issue which you wanted to address, and then the program have worked well and have provided the desired outcomes, then there is one possibility, that's termination of the intervention or redesign of the policy, or even designing new policies or new programs to address new emerging issues. So in a sense, evaluation happens in many cases ex ante. That's before the policy is implemented, or even before the program is implemented, whichever you might want to refer to. So it can also happen mid-term. That's when you are already involved in all of this process of identifying the policies and then implementing them. Evaluation might be ongoing as well to tell you whether what you are doing is working, is giving results or not. And then there is this ex post evaluation, which happens later to determine the outcome of the intervention. So the ex post evaluation, as I said, may lead to the termination of the intervention or the redesign of that intervention. Now, the question here is, which of these stages do you really think is the most challenging in practice, and why? Whether when you are thinking of policy or programs or even projects. So that's really a reflective question you might want to keep thinking about as we go. So as I've just mentioned, policy implementation is one of the most crucial steps in translating policies into practice. But this process itself is, again, political. It is an ongoing iterative process. It's not an end product. It's not a linear process. So the policy practice process is not, as I said, a linear one. It's rather an ongoing, an iterative. You might make errors. You might want to correct those. It's a trial and errors kind of dynamic involved in this process. So policies, as I said, they provide broad guidelines and intentions to address societal issues set by government or organizations, and programs are the operational translation of policies into specific goals, resources, and responsibilities for achieving the outcome. And the implementation is just really an interactive political process. It's not neutral the way we implement programs. We might have a broader policy, let's say, around vaccination of children. But then this immunization program, and I think this is exactly one of the programs we are considering for our next assessment, you might see that how resources are being allocated, or even what is being prioritized in terms of what can we do to get children accessing the immunization. That decision-making process itself, sometimes it's, political calculations and negotiations among diverse parties around who does what, who gets more resources, whose responsibilities should be prioritized between maybe the national government and the state or, state level governments. So again, all these clearly are questions of implementation, and they show an interaction between political actors, also political dynamics, which are all involved in policy making. And again, different considerations, including values, but also practicalities of, the programs might be, involved in how all these decisions are made. So programs definitely are ongoing initiatives that encompass multiple related projects and activities aimed at fulfilling policy objectives. Programs are ongoing, whereas projects are somehow time-bound. Many programs, you will see that many programs, are ongoing for many years, whereas a project, in many cases, is just defined in a certain amount of time and specific resources being allocated to that. And again, as I said, programs involve multiple related projects, while projects are broken down into specific tasks or activities for clearer organization and to achieve the outcomes in a more specific aspect of the policy issue we want to address. Of course, some organizations might omit the program level or start tasks early on to adapt to the resources constraints. But even in that case where we have these policies, which we think they do not require lots of operationalization, we still see that, yes, some level of implementation needs to happen. I'm thinking here of policies around maybe, when we had COVID-19, we have a lot of measures being taken and policies in place. Policies around, for example, travel bans. You might think, okay, this is one of the policy where it's straightforward that, yeah, the travel have been banned and there is probably nothing in terms of the implementation of this we can do other than just knowing that the travels have been cancelled. But that's not as simple. It's not as simple as that. You might still see what else the government is doing in terms of making sure that this measure, if I can call it that way, is being respected. Are there patrols being conducted maybe around the sea to see who's trying to enter the territory illegally? Are there, how is the government, for example, planning to help these companies, aviation companies, to, not lose everything in terms of their benefits and so on and so forth? So clearly, most policies, to be operational, they need to be translated into programs. But even in cases where we have policies which seemingly might not be requiring that much planning, things might still be happening in one way or another to ensure that these policies are, being translated into action and that they are achieving the desired outcomes. So then the question of program evaluation becomes an important one, because this is where we come to assess how well the government policies and the programs which, are aligned with that policy are achieving the outcome. Are they being effective? And I think in some of the weeks we discussed about these concepts of effectiveness and efficiency. So effectiveness is whether the policy and all the measures which have been adopted to translate that policy into practice, are they being successful? And efficiency, of course, whether we are getting to achieve the outcome with not only minimizing the resources, but making sure that, we do not spend more, or that we are doing things in a way that doesn't, overuse the resources we have, with financial resources, manpower and other resources, and even the time which is being involved in, implementing that policy. So this also involves a deliberate, organized, and thorough gathering of data and an examination of the data to measure the outcome, but also the influence of various programs on the desired outcome. So some key examples I gave in this week's material include policies around education, policies around immunization. You might see many other programs which are in place and which you might want to see whether they are working. In week 9, we looked at one of the policies around migration. We looked at the humanitarian program, and we tried to discuss in the tutorial whether that program was achieving its outcome or whether we thought things could be improved. So this is the kind of work really we are doing in our next assessment piece. So we are trying to assess if a social program is achieving or has achieved its outcome, and then determine if any changes are required, or whether we get insights about what works, what doesn't work, and why or how things can be improved. So this is exactly what policy and program evaluation is all about. We are trying to understand and building insights into how a policy has been working or is working, and whether things can be improved in one way or another, or are we achieving the outcome, or are we not really on track in achieving the outcome? And this process really requires data. You can't just sit down and start assuming things around a specific program. You need to collect the data which is required, and that data will be useful to inform your evaluation of the program. So now, to do the data collection, a few methods are often encouraged. First of all, policy and program evaluation is thought of as a systematic and structured approach to gather and analyze the data about the policy or the program which we are thinking about. So, and this data can be around anything, including the design of the program or the policy, the implementation process, the outcomes, to determine whether the program is being effective and whether it is achieving some sort of impact. So to do this, we employ a variety of social science methods. Qualitative methods and quantitative methods are encouraged as ways of building insights into how a policy or a program is working. So qualitative techniques are very important because they are non-numerical data, such as interviews, focus groups, case studies, and really data related to the lived experience. And these can provide an in-depth insights into the experiences and perceptions of the people affected by that policy. But also quantitative techniques are very much encouraged. These are just numerical data, which you collect through things like a survey, experiments, econometric modeling. And the idea here is just to allow you as an evaluator to measure the extent to which a policy, is achieving its outcomes, and whether any corrections are necessary or anything can be done to correct the way things are being done. So in our third assessment, we are applying some of these methods. And you'll see that much of the data which I suggested that you look at, some of this data will be quant, other data will be qualitative. And just really to give you an idea on how program evaluation is performed and what kind of data you can use into understanding a program and deciding whether that program is working, whether it's achieving good outcome, and even what can be done to, improve that program. So in our third assessment, actually, we are using two policy program options. Program one, as I said, is the National Students Wellbeing Program. This is really a program in the education sector. Will be very important opportunity for you to start reconnecting again with our content from week 7, where we discussed about education policy. So you might want to see this program, and much of the data which you have in this program and its evaluation report, much of these evidence will be quite qualitative. So I do not expect, well, I do not really expect a lot of calculations or statistical data to be very much involved in that, but it will be one of the options where you are allowed to analyze and engage with a lot of qualitative data from interviews, focus groups, and lived experience of students who have been engaged in this program. And then you can answer a few questions whether this program is working or is not working. Then the second option is the National Immunization Schedule. National Immunization Program. So the National Immunization Program is a broader government program under which you have subset populations being targeted. One of these populations is children aged 0 to 4 years. So there are a few other demographics, of course, which are being targeted. Older people and people at risk of certain diseases are also being targeted. But I want you really narrow your focus specifically on childhood immunization, that the immunization of children aged 0 to 4. Yeah, and see how the national immunization program is working for these children. You'll be answering a few questions again on that specific option as well, if that's what you choose. And that will be helpful in how you do your third assessment. Now, in terms of the questions you'll be responding to, you'll be analyzing the impact of these social policy program. And again, you need to choose just one option, like what we did in assessment 2. Don't need to work with both, just one of them will be enough. And then with the option you'll have chosen, you'll try to identify and discuss the purpose or intended target group of the of that policy or that program. So if you chose the National Immunization Program, you can say things like this program is designed for different demographics or different categories of population, but in your work, you'd have to describe the children who are being targeted by the childhood immunization subcomponent of this program. So, and then of course, you'll have to describe all the subsets of children who are under that program, including children in general, children aged 0 to 2, children aged 2 to 3, and so on and so forth, but also other demographic characteristics such as indigenous versus non-indigenous children, children from migrant and non-migrant families. How is the program really working for all these categories of children? You would then move on to identifying and discussing how the policy is delivered in terms of who is responsible of what in delivering that program, what resources are being allocated, and where can you get access to, that program in particular. And of course, you might state things around the state and the state and Commonwealth government responsibilities in delivering that program. You then need to use the data from evaluations and other government or academic sources to critically analyze if the program is meeting the needs of the targeted groups. So for the National Student Wellbeing Program, there is actually an evaluation report, which is a very detailed report, only that in that report, much of the data, much of the evidence is qualitative, and you really need to engage with that to be able to make the case whether the program is meeting the needs of the targeted group or whether there are any gaps or any issues you identify in how that program is working. And of course, there is a wealth of information online on the website of the government regarding that program. So you might want to see what those evidences really tell you on how the program is working. For the National Immunization Program, there is also a website where you can get all of the data you need to answer question 3, including an evaluation report where you can get also much of the data you really need to answer question 3. And then the last question will be to discuss the extent to which the program is achieving its intended purpose and provide suggestions for how it could be improved. So I'll definitely speak to these aspects in a separate video. I'll be recording another video where I better explain this assessment in more details and really encourage you to start embracing this specific learning opportunity on how you can start doing your next assessment. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next recording.